Welcome to the Honourable and The Hack, a podcast about the stories that shape our province and our country.
This week's episode of The Honourable and The Hack is brought to you by Radium North. Managing industrial or commercial projects? Make one call. Radium North delivers all trades for maintenance and construction, plus marine and crane services to keep your operation moving. Indigenous owned and proudly based in Newfoundland and Labrador. Radium North, built to support industry. Hey everyone, and welcome to The Honourable and The Hack. So happy to have you back. My name is Andrew Parsons, and I am so happy to be here with my colleague, Mr. Alex Bill.
Hey, Andrew. Good to be doing this again. For the viewers at home, the listeners aren't catching this, but we didn't try and have this white shirt, black shirt, dark room, light room thing going on, but it certainly kind of casts some doubt on which one of us is honorable and which one is the hack.
Well, I'm looking a little Darth Vader-ish. You're looking a little bit maybe Obi-Wan. There's some dark and evil versus the good guys here. But another thing too, just starting off the podcast, if you were just listening, we have got our first sponsor. So want to throw a big shout out to Radium North for coming on board. Great company. They like the pod. And so it was just great for them to want to come on board with us and be a part of this venture. So thank you to Radium North.
Yeah, it's good to be growing, and we hope to continue growing. And on that note, we have a lot to unpack today and talk about. The House of Assembly has been open for a couple of weeks, and in the midst of that, we had a major announcement about a benefits agreement for Beta Nord. And it's a busy time of year, and I think on Beta Nord in particular, my publication, All Newfoundland and Labrador, has really been churning out kind of exclusive news on the topic. Andrew, you've got firsthand information on it, some of which you can't share, some of which perhaps you can kind of enlighten us on. But I think we can really provide a perspective on this project and this deal that, people in the province might not be able to get anywhere else right now.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is that we've been talking about this since we started. So I think we've sort of been hinting and anticipating that it would come. And I was not shocked at the timing to lay that out there at the beginning of the House of Assembly. Coincidence, maybe? I don't know. What a way to kick off your first session in the House as a new government by announcing a mega project here. So, I mean, the timing worked out great. I will say that one of the things was since that announcement, maybe the caveat to some of what we talk about, though, is that there has been some news lately. There's some federal talk, which I think you were mentioning earlier, Alex, when me and you were chatting. The environment ministers had some comments. So everything we say is with the caveat that there's still some things that are out there, but we can definitely talk about like the impact, what it means, some of the reaction and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think the most important caveat is that this is not a done deal. It's going to be a year before Equinor and their minority partner BP decide to pull the trigger and go ahead on this. The deal is a big step on the way. I think that while there are questions, and the opposition will certainly raise them as much as they can, it is unequivocally a win for Wakeham and his government, Premier Wakeham and his government right now. What was your reaction on the night of the unveiling of the benefits agreement?
Well, and again, I'll throw in another caveat here. I am going to be careful about some of the things that I say. I was the energy minister for 5 years. This was one of the files that we talked about. Had a lot of legwork on this file. The biggest thing I can say is that while I've always felt that it was going to happen, I was happy that it got announced. I mean, this is a big deal for the province, for citizens. Certainly for the Department of Finance, this is a big deal. I'm sure the Minister of Finance, whenever these are happening, is happy. Yeah, there's still stuff to be done, but the benefits agreement itself is a major component of moving towards that FID. I mean, the reality is that Equinor has multiple opportunities globally, and they sanction them based on when you look at that whole ball of value there, and benefits agreement is a big part of that. So having that certainty there helps them as they move towards FID, towards that final decision. Again, I know that could go either way. I'd like to think that is a major step forward, though, and an important one in getting this to completion.
Yeah. So I think in discussing this today, we'll probably skip past some of the big headline stuff, the numbers. It's 400 million barrels, 430. Uh, the jobs, the 4.3 billion projected revenue for the province. That's out there. It's been covered. I'd like to get into the stories that people might be missing and the angles and considerations that aren't out there as much. And I think I'll start by simply saying that this is a project that is not as attractive as some of the other ones the province has had, certainly less than Hebron and Hibernia. And I don't think that's talked about quite enough. I suppose when Equinor decided to put it on hold for 3 years, that was probably a signal to some people. But it is the most remote project on planet Earth. Nobody's ever tried to do offshore oil this far from shore. And for that reason, they're trying to create an FPSO, floating production storage offloading installation, that doesn't actually have a lot of people on it, with lots of remote operations, because that's a really long helicopter ride. And if you can't get a helicopter out there, it's a really long supply vessel ride to bring your staff out. So when they have these announcements, they talk about millions of person hours, which is this meaningless figure for most people. But if you kind of crunch that down, it works out to, over 25 years, about 600 jobs. And if you take construction employment out of that figure, it actually falls much lower. So it's really not the employer that Hibernia would be either, or Hebron. And while there's a lot of oil there, 430 million barrels is a lot. I think that's about what we've produced at Terra Nova, and White Rose still isn't even at that figure. And there might be much more out there. There might be more than a billion. There's also been some exploration wells in the last 5 years that were in that zone and missed, and they were dry. And that suggests that the geology there is also complicated and might not be one big kind of pool, but something a little more complicated. And for all of those reasons, the companies involved, they like it. There's a lot of money on the table here, and the long run upside is immense, billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars for the companies. But there's a lot more risk than perhaps any of our 4 other offshore oil projects.
Yeah, I mean, you said a lot there, but the biggest thing I would take away is that was not a sure deal in the fact that it is, like you say, the most remote project in the world. It's a massive, massive project, but when you're talking about that offshore, and this is farther offshore than anything, that's a big deal. And I'm just even thinking, as someone who had the benefit, I actually got to travel to Hibernia, did the chopper ride. Nothing fun about that. If you're a person that's doing it on a regular basis, it certainly gave me an appreciation for what people go through. And then to think about how much farther and longer, and just the safety regulations that come along with something like that. Yeah, a massive number of barrels. I personally think that there are more, but I mean, when you get into that certainty, again, you got to find that base level. Like any of them, hopefully, once you get going and continue drilling, you're going to find more. Um, but it's a different type of project too. I mean, full stop. I mean, this is not the same as projects that were done before. Certainly not the GBS that we've seen being constructed. It's a different ballgame. So, like I say, there's still some concerns, I'm sure, from Equinor's point of view. I mean, look, I don't think anybody's walking out of this losing money. I mean, that's just not going to happen. But if you're one of these companies, you're wondering what your IRR is. What is that internal rate of return that you're going to get? And they always want that to be higher. Is it high enough? I remember seeing some of these figures sitting there and being educated on the stuff, and you're like, wow, okay, like I say, it's an interesting component of this. But overall, I think one of the issues with this project, and not an issue per se, but the degree of difficulty when you look at the environmental side of things, when you look at the distance of this, and this is the first project that hits UNCLOS, when you're talking about getting into that international waters, um, that was a big deal. I mean, just to go back a little bit, one of the big components of this, Alex, you know, completely, was the change in government. Having Prime Minister Carney, Minister Hodgson, and not Stephen Gabot, made a ton of difference here in this file. I mean, I give Premier Fury. I mean, look, there's a lot of work done on this. A huge win for Wakeham, but this doesn't get environmental approval without Andrew Fury going to the wall with the federal government to get, like, what we had to do was almost a reverse of it, where, like, we had to go above and beyond to make that environmental case, and we shouldn't have had to do that. But there's been a complete change of ideology at the federal level. We're talking emissions caps, just a whole change, a sea change. I can only wish that I got to deal with some of those people. And again, no offense to people like Jonathan Wilkinson, who was always a supporter, but Stephen Gabot, I mean, it was difficult, and that change there. This federal government's been a supporter. I mean, just before we tape here, I mean, Prime Minister Carney's over in Norway. He's talking about Beta Nord. That wasn't something that happened.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to the federal government again soon. It's a great point in any major multi-billion-dollar industrial project, having that kind of soft support, I guess you could call it, from government is a signal to firms that they're certainly keeping an eye out for. And that's one of several factors that they kind of put on the chalkboard in the for or against column, because as you say, it's not about will this make money. It will make money. Will it make more money than a project in Brazil for Equinor?
Yeah.
Or will it make more money than a project on the Norwegian continental shelf? And, it might not happen. Premier Wakeham talked about, when firms make it to the decision gate 2, there's a 90% chance it makes it to the next one. But they put it on the shelf once before. As all Newfoundland and Labrador reported, BP, the minority partner in here, it's more risk than they want to take. They actually want to, it's called farm down because it might not be selling necessarily, but they like to kind of cut off some of its equity and would like to see another firm come in and take some of that risk away from them. And, their CEO has a lot of history in Newfoundland. She worked on Hebron and had some battles with the Williams government in those days. And she was later CEO of another company, BHP in Woodside, that pulled out of a major, major exploration project on in the Orphan Basin. So, their stake is big enough that they might say whether or not this goes ahead or when. And so that's a big kind of question mark. One that Equinor has to wrestle with, and the province. $12 billion, a number sure to go up, is the capital cost. So, how the companies pay for this and how the Newfoundland and Labrador government may pay for its share, big, big questions. And I think that while the government is, correct and right, I suppose, to celebrate this moment, we shouldn't ignore that parts of this are still an uphill battle.
Absolutely. Look, there's a ton of uncertainty that's still left. That's normal. But again, your point was 100% there, that this is a win. This is a celebration, and it was a celebration that should be had, because it's a milestone moving forward. So there's a famous quote from Pulp Fiction by Winston Wolfe that I will not repeat on the air, but if you've ever watched that movie, you'll get what I'm saying here. So yes, while it's time to celebrate, there's still some work left to do. But yeah, and again, I think the timing of it was great. I mean, it led to a week of debate in the House, which we're going to get into after. We're going to talk about the first 2 weeks in the House of Assembly. A lot of back and forth. Liberals asking about the project, and and some good questions, some real questions here, because part of this project too was the $200 million dry dock. I know that there's an opportunity for topsides to be done here, but there's very far from any certainty that it will happen, which was a big part of campaigns over the summer. All the topsides had to be done here? That has not changed. I don't think any of that has changed at this juncture, but the $200 million dry dock is a big piece of work.
Yeah, and that seems to be the trade-off for topsides work. It's possible that a company could bid and be competitive against the international market to get a particular module done here. But in lieu of forcing Equinor and BP to do that, the agreement is that Equinor will put $200 million towards a floating dry dock to be based in Beta Nord. The cost of actually building this thing, it could be twice that or higher. And there's a really interesting question that, I've been asking and getting some answers about: why is this something that we want? And the message we get is that there's a ton of ship work to come. There's defense work, perhaps decommissioning work, but it is a kind of big bet and a lot of money for the province to put forward because every dollar above 200 million is going to be on the government. Kind of the field of dreams thing, we'll build it and the business will come. What do you think of that and this prospect?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you talk to some people in industry, and look, I'm passing on what I hear. I mean, I'm not a person that designs or builds dry docks or anything like that. But when you hear the figure 200, that seems to be on the very low end of what these costs will be. So there will be costs to be borne by the province. How much is it? I think you may have misspoke earlier. You said it was going to be based at Beta Nord. I think it was going to be based at Bull Arm, which was another part of the conversation that week, though, Alex, was the decision at the same time for the Bull Arm MOU was rescinded. But the main thing here, you nailed it. This is not an oil and gas play. This is a defense sector shipbuilding play, is what this is, in my opinion. And they've pretty much confirmed that just in their public commentary. And look, there is a massive amount. The defense is the hot topic, defense spending, everything else. So it's smart to sort of be working that way. What comes out of it? Lot to figure out yet. But very large piece of infrastructure, and so it'll be interesting to see how that all goes as it's moving forward into RFPs and design and work. And can it be done at Bull Arm? It's a pretty big piece of work.
All these B words. I'm just glad I didn't say Bay Bulls. But one official kind of said to me, Riley, well, if it doesn't work out, I guess we can always sell it. It floats. But paying for it, tacking 200 or 250 or 300 million dollars onto our budget is it's not an easy thing to do, especially if the provincial government is going to take on 10% of the equity in Beta Nord, when then you're talking about 1.2 billion or more. It's a combined figure that could go to $2 billion. And provinces raise debt. They sell bonds in the bond market. Our province has the lowest credit rating, so our interest rate is higher. There are creative financing arrangements that we've been talking about, we as the province with Equinor, but those might not really help that interest rate that much. The question of can we afford to do this as a province, even though on the whole the project should be making money for coffers, but the upfront costs are a difficult question to answer too.
Well, it's not just the upfront cost; it's the back end costs that come with ownership as well. So the first thing is that look, the equity stake has always been there on the table. That's not a new addition, 10% or some other figure. Obviously, the companies want the province to be there. Who wouldn't want another partner going to ship in some of that cash to get going? That's a big part of a number of conversations, especially you go back a few years on Terra Nova. And you saw a complete realignment of ownership there and a lot of pressure on government to come in. And we didn't, and thankfully we, like I say, a little bit biased here. I think we did the right thing. I didn't think it was the right thing to invest in equity there, and again, that was a success story. But that's going to be a conversation, but like you say, it's upfront. But one of the conversations whenever you're talking equity is end of life, when you get into decommissioning or liability, when it comes to the something nobody wants to talk about when you talk about blowouts or anything like that. I mean, that's a reality that these things have happened. We've been very lucky up here. um, but it's a back end cost that has to be figured in, and I don't know what that would be. But these are large numbers. So again, like you say, a province that you know continually has fiscal pressures. uh, this is going to be a conversation going forward. If Proline was doing wagers on it, I think I know what I would bet on, but I'll leave that to the government to figure out what they want to do.
Yeah, great point on decommissioning and liability. Just two more components on top of that upfront cost. Big bill. And if the province is getting pressure from BP, for instance, about, hey, we don't want any more equity than we've already got, well, then if they think if we don't take this equity, maybe the project doesn't happen, there's a political calculation to be made there. And as you're probably aware, and far more than me, there's always a bit of brinkmanship with these sorts of things. And yeah, seeing who's going to blink first.
Absolutely. Holy moly. 100%. There is a real sort of, like you say, brinksmanship, sort of, will they blink or not? That's a big part of this conversation, and that will continue going forward.
So before we move on to the House of Assembly, I think I'd like to come back to your point earlier about Ottawa and the federal government's position on this. In addition to this sort of friendlier oil environment that the Carney government has been laying out, the federal government, according to Equinor and the provincial government, and MP Joanne Thompson, the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and our Newfoundland cabinet representative, said that Ottawa will bear the burden of payments that are mandated under the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. And real quickly for the audience, what this is that I think the negotiations began in the 70s, but as you know, the UN and charter members talking about, well, what are we going to do about kind of governing our waters beyond 200 nautical miles and the continental shelves? And what are we going to do about mining? What are we going to do about oil there? An agreement was struck that for oil production beyond your 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, you would pay money to the International Seabed Authority, which is based in Jamaica, and they would distribute it to poorer countries. A sort of way of sharing the wealth of the, ocean resources that go beyond a country's traditional boundaries. For Beta Nord, this could be hundreds of millions of dollars. It could be billions of dollars. It's from gross production, and it escalates to, I think, 6 or 7%. I don't have the figure in front of me, but it's been a point of contention for years over this project. Canada ratified the agreement, the Convention on the Law of the Sea, in 2003, and it has never said how the payments would be made. So companies have said, well, Canada agreed to make these payments. Canada should make these payments. The federal government, reasonably, I suppose, logically says, well, no, you're the companies making the money. You're going to make the payments. But there was no regulation about it, no laws put in place. And there's just been this kind of conflict ever since. And now, according to what we've heard so far, the feds are going to step up and pay for this. Andrew, you've been a part of that debate for years on your side as well. I don't know if you can shed any light on it.
I can throw a few points in there. The first one, though, is just a coincidence that right now I'm actually, when I get a minute, I'm reading former MP Bill Graham's biography. And Bill was the federal minister of foreign affairs when Canada finally signed off on UNCLOS. And he talks in the book about how Newfoundland and Labrador fought it and fought it and fought it for years. It was finally signed when he got in. Danny Williams was actually premier. And I think the federal government was actually sneaky in how they did it. Like, this was not this was sort of a brought in through, I think it was a resolution or something like that. Again, I can't remember it quite. It was one of those things. There was a clerk actually in Ottawa, Alex Himmelfarb, that was a part of these machinations to bring this to. And again, as we all know, when Premier Williams found out, he went sideways on what the federal government did. So then you go to the next point, which is, it was something I learned about early on in my tenure about this, and our point at every point of any conversation. I remember doing a press conference with Jonathan Wilkinson, and we said, look, Newfoundland and Labrador is not paying these fees, full stop, period. It's not our agreement. We didn't sign off on it. We didn't agree to it, nor do we think the companies should have to bear this. I mean, it's a massive impact on the internal rate of return, on the financing and the cost of the project when you throw this big bill on top of that. And it never really went anywhere. But clearly, that was a part of the conversation over the last number of months from the federal government. And again, put it out there. This was a Mark Carney government that agreed to take this on. I know there might be some conversations about the fine details and points going forward, but when you think about the philosophy of it all, it's a big win. I mean, when you have the local provincial progressive conservatives thanking Mark Carney in the House of Assembly, then that just goes to show that there's some credit to be given there, and credit to the provincial negotiators for moving this point along too.
I wonder if the federal government didn't fully plan out the political side, though. And you're seeing it this week where Joanne Thompson, St. John's MP and our federal cabinet minister, she went up on stage and said, Ottawa's going to bear this burden. The company and the province will not have to pay under UNCLOS. And then in a committee meeting this week, Julie DeBruzen, the federal environment minister, she didn't quite disagree with that, but I guess cast some shadow or doubt. She was skeptical of the $1 billion figure that was thrown out there. And fair enough, the range is so variable. It could be a few hundred million, or if this moves into a second and third phase project, it could be 2 or 3 billion. I mean, it's a massive range and it depends on so much, including the price of oil. And so that was fair on her part. She also talked about we're still negotiating, and that is what the provincial Liberals have seized upon. Yep. And I think Minister Thompson is going to need to clarify too, because she talked about negotiating with the International Seabed Authority, who hasn't determined yet how these payments are going to be made, what the ratio is going to be. And Canada might want some say as well. And so if there are negotiations going on there, then fine. If there are still negotiations to be had with Equinor and the province, however, well, that's a big red flag. And we're going to be looking for some clarity on that as journalists real soon.
So I'm just saying this with absolutely no proof that it was the case, but I'm willing to bet that on Tuesday morning, when all the federal MPs and politicians got their news packets and their briefing notes and everything else and saw the media and saw Minister Thompson saying that, I bet you there was a line of Quebec MPs screaming about that and probably getting in the Minister of Environment's ear about that. I can't say that it happened, but let's just think about it, because the fact is Quebec wants no part of this. And let's just say I bet there's some internal pressure, political pressure in this equation.
And for I suppose political opponents of oil and gas development, it's pretty easy to say, well, that's a subsidy. And if it isn't in the strictest legal sense, I can see why they would say that. I think there are political possibilities for the federal government too, though, right? Because the countries that are going to be receiving this, it's for poor landlocked countries. Like Burkina Faso is going to get some of this money. It's a country I think of. Kazakhstan, maybe a little bit, although they have oil and gas development. And the federal government recently took the Coast Guard and moved it from DFO to Department of National Defense and said, hey, wow, we're spending a lot more on defense now. And so you could argue that this is simply part of Canada's foreign aid commitment, and for which we spend, X billion of dollars. And this is just a new component of that. And it's going to the same kinds of countries that we would support through other foreign aid measures as well. And that could be something they're negotiating about. And ultimately, if that's the case, you're just kind of moving money around the table rather than adding more. And there's a way for Ottawa to kind of portray it that way. I don't know how easy it is, but
and I know how it's going to be portrayed by. We could have another full-on conversation about Canadian money going to other places when we face the challenges that we face nationally and provincially in terms of affordability and things like that. The last takeaway, AB, is this. This will not be the last conversation on Beta Nor that you and I have. And I was one of the readers of all the content coming out of all Newfoundland and Labrador, of which there was a ton. It was great to read. You guys got plenty more stories on this to come. So it's been an interesting week, but it's certainly it's certainly still a live issue going forward.
Yeah, we have broken a bunch. I was proud that we actually broke the story that the dry dock was part of the deal before the deal was even announced. So encouraging anybody who isn't already a subscriber of all Newfoundland and Labrador to subscribe. But we are going to be continuing to focus on this, every component of it, certainly local benefits, opportunities for local companies as well, which is our bread and butter. But with that, I think we should move on to the House of Assembly after a quick sponsor break.
This week's Honourable The Hack brought to you by Radium North. In commercial and industrial operations, downtime isn't an option. Radium North provides complete multi-trade construction and maintenance services, including marine and crane divisions, to keep your projects on schedule and your operations running safely. Indigenous owned with offices in Stephenville and St. John's, Radium North is proud to serve Newfoundland and Labrador while actively supporting the communities where we work. When you need capability, reliability, and a partner who stands behind their work, choose Radium North.
Andrew, I've done an awful lot of talking about Beta Nord, which I love doing. But why don't I hand the baton over to you and you lead us in with your thoughts about what you've seen in the first couple weeks of the House of Assembly?
Yeah, no, it's obviously on a personal level, very different. My first time in 15 years or so, not sitting in the chamber, not being a part of it, and being a spectator, like many others. So sitting back, I'm still tuning in and watching it. And we've had two interesting weeks in the House of Assembly. Lots of different points we can get to. Um, First thing I'll say, and we had him on as a guest, Speaker Paul Lane. And one thing I'm going to say to Paul, if you're listening, you got to get those ministerial department names down. Still a little bit of learning to do there. And I say this, jokingly. You can tell. Look, it's new opposition, new government, new speaker, even some new table officers. So it's a whole new ball game there. Observations right off the top. It was exactly as I suspected, and I think I might have even called it. The first week started off with a bang. Emotions were high, tempers flaring, getting the warnings from the speaker. We never got quite to the naming of names and the shaming and being silenced. Um, but by Thursday, I got to tell you, when they adjourned for the first week, it was an interesting week to watch. And the one thing I'll say to people who may not know, when you're watching it, when you're watching live or the video version, you can hear some of that background, but it is nothing like being in there and actually hearing the background heckling, noise, commentary, everything else. I miss that. I've been a part of that and getting to hear it, and I'm sat there knowing that it's going on. You can sort of hear the rumbling, and I'm sitting there. Geez, I wish I knew who was saying this to that person. That's one of the things I did absolutely miss.
Well, Andrew, I might have good news for you. I don't know if you're aware, but you are a member of the news media now. And we've got this whole beautiful gallery that we can sit in above and watch the catcalling and heckling going on that doesn't make it to the broadcast. So
Okay,
maybe
so
we've got to get you a
I'm
pass.
gonna disabuse you. Number one, I am definitely not a member of the media. Um, Number two, no plans to be going back to that gallery anytime soon. I did my time and I enjoyed it, but I'm gonna sit back and watch from the comfort of my home as a viewer. Which again, I wasn't sure if I was going to do, but I guess here me and you we're talking about it all the time. I felt that I had to watch, and I'm glad I did. Actually, I didn't miss it per se, but I felt watching it that I had an insight that not everybody else does. And like I say, one thing, the opposition, I was impressed actually, in the sense that they came in coordinated, getting their legs. Like that's not an easy thing to do. Figuring out your QP strategy, figuring out who's going to ask the questions, which topics are you going to go on, and look, there's a lot of backroom stuff on that. I mean, you've got so many members and you've got about 24 minutes of questions. And I thought they did a good job. I'll give credit to John Hogan. I thought John did a good job. I mean, he's got a background, obviously, of being a litigator, being a lawyer. You can think on your feet and ask these questions and keep that demeanor. Um, so yeah, I thought they did a good job. They had some new members getting in there. You can figure out there's a science to this, and who's asking who, that stuff matters. So I thought they started. Excuse me, sorry. I thought they started off really well. Um, I thought that the government, first time answering the questions, and that's a big change when you go over there. Having been through that, there's a big difference between asking the questions and answering the questions. I think overall, I think they did well. There was definitely some that struggled. I felt were a little defensive right off the bat. And no need to be defensive. And again, it's the natural thing to do. I mean, I was a part of it when we got in 2016. If something went wrong, you say, "Well, that's because we inherited all this mess that was left to us." I mean, that's that's been going on since Frank Moore's government got in. The new government will say the last government made a mess. Um, but I tell you, I got to give credit. I felt Premier Wakeham did a good job. Didn't answer a ton of questions, left a lot to certain ministers, but I felt he kept his composure, answered well. I always say, look, you don't want to start, at high rev. You got to work your way up to that. Some people come in hot, and it just looks like you're an angry person. And I thought premier did a good job of looking like a premier. I mean, that's my honest take.
Yeah, I think Tony Wakeham likes the House of Assembly. And, that might be an obvious thing to say about politicians, but we know quite a few who don't. And Charlene Johnson was an effective cabinet minister in her time, didn't like being in the House of Assembly, as she told us on our
Yep.
podcast. I'm not sure Andrew Fury really liked it all that much. Tony, Premier Wakeham, that is, he's one of the few who I don't hear in the sort of heckling and interrupting stage so much. He does seem to kind of sit back from it, which behooves him as premier. Although I think it really comes down to his personality. And he's one of the few. My colleague James Reed has been in the House for most of the all Newfoundland and Labrador coverage, but I went in a couple of times, and for sure the tension is high. I think the closeness of the election is having an effect here. You're reminded when you're in there, kind of seeing that defensiveness on one side and aggression back and forth of just how close that election was, and I think makes it hard for both parties to get out of election mode, perhaps. And yeah, some of the heckling you just not catch on TV. Keith Russell was singing at somebody at one point for the PCs. I think I heard Pam Parsons say "shame" so much it was like an audition tape for Game of Thrones. There is, it was both sides for sure. Some cabinet ministers at the front of it, some kind of people who get a little hot on each side. But the PCs as government, you would think perhaps wouldn't feel the need to get quite so worked up. And I think in week 2, you've seen that kind of settling in kind of take place. But it was hot at first and tense, and certainly an early test for Speaker Paul Lane.
Yeah, and I wasn't surprised one bit. Like, you can use the sports analogy here. I mean, you've been waiting, you've been off the ice all summer and you want to get back at it. And when you do, you just go full on. But then you settle into a bit of a rhythm. It's a long season. And it's the same thing here. I wasn't surprised to see people come back, and you do have a new speaker that I'm not saying you're trying to figure out, and they're trying to figure out how do you do it, because a speaker, similar to a referee, I mean, how are you going to call it a game? And sometimes, refereeing or umpiring or whatever sport you're talking about can have a negative impact. So, I thought Paul did a good job. I thought Paul, but like anybody, he's going to get better too. I wasn't like, it's funny. People are, the decorum in the house, foolishness. It was no worse that week than it was in 2015 or 2011, or going back into, the heyday of Danny Williams days. It gets news once in a while. I just think it's normal. It's the emotions. Like, you take your job seriously. There's human factors here. If you're a new opposition, yeah, you're ticked off. Why wouldn't you be? If you're a new government, you're getting used. It's hard getting used to answering the questions. You get a little defensive at times. You got to find out why, and you figure out your style. I went through one of those as well. There's times when I would get hot really fast, and you figure maybe that's not the way to work. I settled into an approach where I just, if you give people a good answer, and try to be devoid of the rhetoric, generally you'll pan out better in the long run. There's time and place for everything. There is a bit of theater in it. But going back to the decorum, look, it was not. Look, yes, Paul had to settle him down. If it had continued on, yeah, you're probably going to name somebody. But as you saw, it sort of naturally got there. The second week was very tame compared to the first. Didn't see quite so much. You saw a couple new ministers getting their first questions, and a couple new opposition members in there. I will say, though, maybe I'm biased, but it very much feels like it's opposition versus government. I know the NDP get a few questions here and there, but really feels like the main event is when the opposition go at the government.
It does. I will say, I think Sheila O'Leary might be better built for the House of Assembly than she ever was for St. John City Council. So the City Council is kind of a collaborative environment. A lot of their more heated debates happen in camera, away from cameras and press. But I think she's going to be ready for a scrap when one comes up. But
she's not going to shy away from it.
Yeah,
she is not going to shy away from it, and definitely she's not a rookie by any stretch. To me, she's been in the political game for some time. I want to come back to one thing though, and this is the thing that always turns it sideways. There was a bit of personal stuff going on in that first week, some commentary about, what people were wearing and stuff like that. I mean, you can look at it in one way and say, foolish, but it's also the stuff that causes some of this. And so I think people had to figure out what's fair game and what's not. A lot of times you'll see people like it can get pretty personal in there. I've seen it. I've experienced it. I did not like to partake in that um, because it takes away from the great. Look, I'll go back at you all day on your decision and why I think it was good or stupid, or why I'll defend why what I did was I thought was a good move or not a bad move. But there was a little bit of that the first week. Hopefully, they get their way around that. But I did notice. I didn't notice it as much the second week. I think, like you say, everybody was, you know, flying high, and then they get back down into that long season rhythm.
Yeah, I forget the exact line, but I was there that day, and the PCs were taking shots at John Hogan having sneakers on, and like you say, personal stuff. And I take your point about how this sort of thing has always gone on, but from the press perspective, I would say it always kind of sucks. And I know a number of reporters who are kind of like struggle, not necessarily struggle to do house reporting, but to, I guess, tolerate it, because there is some theater. There's something will come up and there'll be fake outrage on one side, and then the other side will take fake umbrage for that the other side took offense in the first place, and it takes away from actual debate over the issues. And of course, as we see, a lot of answers aren't answers. And in fact, or will just turn it around and be criticisms to the other side. So there's a theater of it. I think there's value, and it's kind of like covering court, where like the pieces that matter most for the story and the public are acute, and you just have to be attuned to recognizing when they happen. But that means sifting through a lot of junk, and there's a lot of junk to sift through at the House of Assembly.
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to figure out. Sometimes there's real heat. Sometimes there's that sort of fake heat. One of the issues I found too, though, and again, when it came to the media, there's a difference between you can tell some people who've been around it. You've been around it a long time. You've seen it, but sometimes you would have a reporter come in and talk about something who may have had coverage of one session, and you almost felt like Morgan Freeman at the end of Shawshank Redemption saying, "Listen here, like, I've been around a long time. You don't know what you're talking about. Like, you're saying something was the best or worst there ever was, and you've been there for a year." So sometimes reporters having that lying experience. I go back to someone like Mike Connors. Like, he'd been there a long time. He had seen a lot, and it gave him a different view than the new person coming in. And sometimes, sometimes you get a little more flux in terms of reporting or reporters in terms of the different outlets, and you can figure out sort of who has it, sort of gets it, and maybe someone who's still learning the ropes.
Yeah, and the little behind the curtain for our audience, a lot of the press gallery right now are relatively new in there. Ben Cleary from NTV, who's, I mean, I don't know if he's young or not. He's younger than me. Is the sort of senior guy there now.
Yeah.
VOCM has a newer person. All Newfoundland and Labrador has a newer person in there. CBC is still figuring out their House of Assembly coverage rotation. And so there's much like the PCs getting used to being in government and the Liberals getting used to being in opposition, there's a cohort of reporters who are going to get used to House of Assembly coverage too. So learning curves all around.
Yeah, and look, it's what I would say is that it's been fun to watch. It's good to see them back in there. People will figure this out, and I'm already looking forward to next week. One thing is funny. I just put this out there because when you and I were having a chat, and you mentioned that the speaker was holding a stopwatch, and I think that was new to you. You probably hadn't noticed.
Never
that
noticed
before.
before. Never noticed before.
And so it's funny because I thought it would be, good for the audience to know. So every speaker has had a stopwatch forever because there is an actual, when people might not know that there is a rule behind the time of question and answer. Like, you don't have free, full on say what you want, say it, take it as long as you want. There's a set time of 30 minutes. It's broken down and the numbers change. Like, I mean, it used to be the Liberals or the opposition might have had, say, 25 minutes. The NDP had so much. We never had to originally deal with independents getting questions. So even in this new session where you have one independent instead of two, I think that might have had a small effect on the timing and how much time. I think the independents get 2 questions a week, but each of those questions, I believe, is 30 seconds. So I've seen times where you felt like depending on who the speaker was, they might be a little loose on the clock or a little, sometimes you get ticked off and you say, they cut you right off at 30 seconds. And sometimes you're like, well, they got longer. And I think the difference was this time that Paul, being new to it, like I was watching too, I could see him clearly with the stopwatch, but every speaker I've ever seen has had that. And it's necessary. You have to have that because the clocks on the wall are hard to judge, hard to look at. You have to have them there. But if you're not keeping an eye on that clock, you're going to get the ire of House leaders on both sides saying, get in the game here, be careful, give us our fair time.
Yeah, and we've seen not so much getting upset about fair time, but certainly seen Speaker Pauline cut some people off already.
And they have to, like, they always say too, they'll say, like, give us, because they'll know that maybe there's 15 seconds left and they have to give them that 15. So they'll say, time for one question with no preamble. Right. And people want, and the reality is you're supposed to ask the question and not do the big lead up to it. Some people are very good at that because they can sort of ad lib, they can sort of riff on that. You would get some people, though, that could only, like Ron Burgundy, they could only read the question that they had in front of them. Whatever was there, they're going to read. And so they would actually go through like a 30-second preamble and then the speaker would cut them off. Didn't see a whole lot of that. I thought people did a good job, but there's these little things that people might not realize. Like some people right on their feet can make it fit the time. Even on the other side, people don't realize too, like your question timing matters. If you're going to give 10-second answers, that's going to be a lot more questions, right? If you're not chewing up that time. And some ministers, you get the grasp of, like, if you're building up to something that's going to be 45 seconds, well, if your punch is in those last 15 seconds, you're cut off at 30. You sound like an idiot. You never got a chance to get your point across because you were mouthing off along the way. You figure these things out so that you can fully use your time, not get cut off by the speaker, and make your answer that much better.
Yeah, that's a good insight on how it works from the inside, and appreciate that. It's just a couple of items I wanted to touch on, perhaps before we close up here. One of which, curious who you thought, both in your former party and caucus, as well as the PCs, stood out in the House this week.
So I would start off with on the governing side. I think that Lloyd did a good job. A lot of pressure, took a lot of questions, especially that first week coming in, and Beta Nord was the topic. I thought he had a lot of pressure on him, handled it well. He revs a little high early on.
Yeah,
I mean,
a little fiery,
right? And it's funny because we used to talk about that back in the day when I was, there. I'm like, you're starting off too hot. But that's just because you're filled with adrenaline, and I could be the same way. You're just chomping at the bit and getting there, but I thought he had a lot of pressure on him. I mean, Tony did a good job. Just didn't have Premier Wakeham didn't have he left a lot to his ministers, which is nothing wrong with that. I thought Leela Evans had a lot of questions. Did a good job for someone that's handling a lot of portfolios and that biggest one in health. Other than that's just sort of what's hitting me right now. Maybe as soon as we're done, I'll say, oh my God, I forgot this person. On the opposition side, I thought their new members did a good job. Bettina out in Gander did a good job on some questions that she asked on tourism. Michael King, maybe a little biased, but he came in as someone who didn't look like a rookie to me, and maybe he's not. He's been following this game a long time. He had the benefit of having a wonderful, wonderful predecessor. And for anybody that's not watching and is only listening, I'm rolling my eyes as I say this. Don't get up and give me a hard time, but I'm joking here. But Michael did a good job. Jim Parsons got a couple questions in. And as I said earlier, I thought that John Hogan as an opposition leader is good. He's on his game. He's quick on his feet, and that's a necessary thing because if you're only reading what's in front of you, you don't take advantage of. You have to listen. Sometimes the answers you get are foolish, but sometimes you can get a thread there that if you pull on it might lead to something better. And that's why you have to be able to not just go with what you're prepared with, but to respond to what's given.
Yeah, it's interesting you mention John Hogan and Lloyd Parrott because I agree they're both pretty quick on their feet. Hogan in particular, he's a litigator. Both of those guys are also two of the. I don't know if they heckle so much, but they will interrupt and they'll get a little fired up on the other side. And so sometimes what the speaker might try and clamp down on and people get frustrated by is also part of what makes somebody good in the House, I suppose.
It's one of those things too. Like you can't, I guess, judge the book by the first few pages because sometimes the story can evolve. So as a politician, I think sometimes you figure out what works and what doesn't work. Some people come in as full on hecklers and then get and then change out of that because it's not always a good thing. Like you can be a good heckler and you can be a terrible heckler. Like people hear heckling. Sometimes heckling is funny and can add to levity. It's not just during the QP as well. Like during the House debates, there was a lot of funny moments over my career where somebody would say something that was really funny and you would catch them in that um, but yeah, people are going to figure that out and they'll figure out what works for them. And that also depends too on the topic. I mean, some topics are easy because the points, the facts, and it's easy to rhyme on. Sometimes when you're getting into a topic where you really probably the government didn't make a good decision, some of those that you're sitting there going, "Oh my God, I don't want to answer another question." You're just getting beat up. Those will come, and that sometimes determines how good you are by how you were able to take advantage of that as an opposition member and how you're able to respond to that as a government member.
Yeah. So the last point on the House of Assembly I'll bring up, unless there's more that you want to add, is the primary topic. Beta Nord was talked about a lot, but otherwise, the story that the opposition was asking about was the appointment of Dr. Des Whalen to Premier Wakeham's staff and the fact that his compensation is paid through MCP. I don't want to go through every detail of that story because it's been widely reported. I guess the question for us as observers of the House of Assembly is, does this story have any more legs, as we use in the journalism world?
I guess what I would say, and I'm going to preface it by saying that it's one of the things that on any side, that I've never really liked because you can ask questions and do these things, but a lot of, and look, people say, well, if you're a politician, you should be used to it. And I disagree with that. But especially someone who's not elected, who is someone that's working in politics or in government or whatever, there's a personal price here. And look, you can't tell me whether it's Des Whalen or anybody else. Like, what else? Put it this way: I don't even want to bring trauma back to some of these people. There's been some people over the last number of years who have gone through a lot because of these issues and how an opposition and a government react to them. And look, it's an opposition. The current government did a hell of a lot of this when they were opposition, and they can't shy away from that because they did. This current government is doing the same thing. I don't say that I like it, but sadly, it's something that sometimes continues on because when you're talking about political dollars and salaries and things like that, sadly, is one of those things that sometimes draws attention. So I don't know. I just look. I know Des. I like him. He's a good young guy. He's a very smart guy, and I just know. Again, without having talked to him about it or knowing it, like I can imagine that is not fun.
Yeah, likewise, I don't imagine it's the best time for him and his family. I think that in the press, there's some sense of, well, are the Liberals going to find another kind of thing to move on to? This is the first story, I think, that for them as opposition kind of had some cachet that the public did pay attention to for more than a day. And so, kind of, I guess, rightly, as an opposition, you focus on that. And they brought some new information to light. And while I kind of wonder if the story is running out of fumes, the PCs have shown a little bit of sensitivity to it. And Barry Petton, Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, kind of came out, and it was clearly influenced by the Whalen thing, but talked about liberals in government, including in civil service positions, a couple of whom have been laid off since the PCs took office. And as he said in the House of Assembly, we haven't found them all yet. And perhaps something will see him walk back. I'm not quite sure. But a sign, I suppose, of that testiness over this issue and testiness between the two in general. Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, look, when you look at the facts of this situation, it's what I would say is that it's a prime one to exploit to generate public um, distaste, public anger. And it's got all the things there because sometimes when you have to explain something, then in many cases you've already lost. There could be a huge amount of proper and positive and real reasons why you do something, but when you start having to explain that, you've lost the control of the narrative, and that's one of these situations. So while I feel bad for the individual, this is something though that it's been the first time I think there's been sort of a something that has stuck to the current government. They've had a good run of making decisions that aren't getting a lot of pushback, making good decisions, or just staying out of trouble, which is the usual thing you want to do. But at the same time, if there's any PC that sort of looks at this and says, "Oh, clutching their pearls," there was a hell of a lot of that done when they were in opposition as well. The Minister Petton comment, that one struck me. That was a little, when you say we haven't found them all yet, we're searching them all out. There's a little bit of, I don't know. I'm trying to think of the right word. It generates some fear when you hear the deputy premier say something like that. Now, look, when you get to the main point that look, everybody should be working in positions that they're should be in. No one should be anywhere in any position anywhere doing something that they cannot do. But sometimes the problem is that when people get aligned with a stripe and get put in a position, then it doesn't matter how good they are at their job. They are a PC, they are an NDP, they are a liberal, and therefore they're not qualified, they're not suited. And that's the unfortunate part here. But yeah, no, I was I was a little surprised, and I think you may have nailed it. That I think it sort of came from the topic that everybody was going at.
Yeah, I think if he had a little more time to think that one through, it might have come out differently. I mean, the PCs, the government, just named a new communications director to the Justice Department, who's a former PC candidate. And, these things happen, and I'm not saying that that person's going to be partisan in that role. In fact, they have to sign documents saying they won't be. But it's these are glass houses. I remember the Gordon McIntosh debate when he was the highest paid deputy minister. I think that was under your predecessor, but it was your former department. And the PCs were going after the Liberals constantly over that issue. So it's the kind of story that has come up before, and it'll come up again. Whether or not it comes up, sorry.
I've talked to a few people about it, and I think there's a lot of regular people who may not be like super partisan, who are sort of looking at it saying, whatever, like get on to the bigger things. But the reality is there's some people out there that, like I say, they take the stories like this. This week's sponsor for the Honourable The Hack is Radium North. Looking for a contractor that delivers and gives back? Radium North is an Indigenous-owned Newfoundland and Labrador company providing multi-trade construction, maintenance, marine and crane services across commercial and industrial sectors, building projects and stronger communities. Radium North.
Whether it remains a talking point this week as the House resumes, we shall see. I'm not quite sure. Perhaps opposition is going to move on to something new, but time will tell. We'll be talking about it with our future guests. We have one coming up next week that I'm just so excited for. And then following that, we're going to get really just back into the nuts and bolts of politics a little bit more. We do enjoy talking to people from arts and business and everywhere else, but the House is in session. Sparks are flying. People want to know what's going on behind the scenes, and we are going to keep trying to do our best to tell you.
Yeah, this was a fun one. I mean, as much as we enjoy our guests, one of the primary reasons we came together was to to talk about local politics and these things. I mean, we're not this week. We're not even get a chance to talk about more federal floor crossing and the the sort of mood that's going on in Ottawa, which is really interesting right now. With all that going on. So that's a conversation hopefully for another time. But this was a good chance to talk. We got some great guests coming up. I cannot say enough though, folks, please still continue to, maybe like or subscribe and do those things. It really is helpful to us. And I would be remiss if I didn't again mention a new sponsor on here, which is really appreciated by the team. So Radium North, shout out to them. Thanks for coming on board. It's really great to have them. And on that note, AB, another one in the books. A total pleasure. And already looking forward to next week, man. Onwards and upwards.
Take care.